You grew up thinking you were just a quiet kid. People said you were shy, sensitive, thoughtful. They called you the good one, the easy one, the child who did not cause trouble. But the truth is darker than that. You were not quiet because you wanted to be. You were quiet because the one man who was supposed to teach you how to exist in the world made you feel like your existence took up too much space. Maybe he was there, physically, but he felt far away. Maybe he was always looking at something else, thinking about something else, carrying weight in his eyes that you never understood. Or maybe he was unpredictable. Some days he was calm. Some days he was a storm. You never knew which version of him you would get. So you learned early that silence was safer than visibility. You learned that staying small kept the peace. You learned that needing nothing kept the world from breaking. Or maybe he was simply absent. Not cruel, not angry, not loud, just gone. An empty chair at the table. A voice you did not hear often. A presence that felt more like a shadow than a man. And as a child, you told yourself it was fine. You pretended you did not need him. You pretended you were strong enough to grow without guidance. But deep inside, something fragile began to crack. You learned to be a man without a blueprint. You learned to hold yourself together without anyone showing you how. And you carried that hidden wound into adulthood without ever giving it a name. You do not realize how much that wound shapes you until you begin to understand why you move the way you move in the world. Why your voice tightens around certain people. Why you hesitate when you want to speak. Why you feel like your presence is a burden. Why your body holds tension even when no one is threatening you. Why you are afraid to look another man in the eyes for too long. Why you pull back when a woman gets too close. A child does not understand fatherly absence as a flaw in the parent. A child interprets it as a flaw in himself. You began believing that you were the reason he did not show up. You were the reason he did not listen. You were the reason he seemed disappointed, irritated, distant, or simply uninterested. You blamed yourself because the mind of a child would rather feel unworthy than helpless. That belief did not stay in childhood. It followed you into every room you walked into as an adult. It followed you into conversations, into relationships, into moments where you should have felt confident, but instead felt the familiar tightening in your chest. You walk into places expecting to be looked through. You speak expecting to be ignored. You love expecting to be left. You try to be strong, but inside you still carry that silent fear that your presence alone is not welcome. You do not call it fear. You call it being introverted. You call it overthinking. You call it being picky or private or cautious. But underneath all the labels is something simple and heavy. A boy who learned to shrink himself because the first man he ever looked up to did not know how to see him. This is the childhood wound that kills your masculine presence. Masculine presence is not about loudness. It is not about muscles or money or dominance. Masculine presence is the quiet, rooted confidence of a man who believes he is allowed to take up space. It is the energy of a man who is not afraid of himself. It is the calm of a man who does not look to anyone else to tell him who he is. But when the father wound is still alive, that presence dies before it can even grow. A boy who learned to stay small becomes a man who walks into a room apologizing for being there. A boy who learned that approval comes from silence becomes a man who loses his voice around people he admires. A boy who learned that love was distant becomes a man who tightens his heart every time someone tries to get close. You learn to protect yourself by disappearing. That is the wound. And that wound has shaped everything. You see it in the way you hesitate before speaking, as if your thoughts need permission. You see it in the way your voice softens when you feel tension, because conflict makes you feel like a child again. You see it in the way you lean back when someone challenges you, because some part of you believes that pushing back will bring punishment. And you see it most painfully in the way you show up with women. You want to be the grounded, steady man who makes her feel safe. But when she looks at you, when she admires you, when she opens up to you, that old wound wakes up. It tells you that the attention is temporary. It tells you that love is unreliable. It tells you that the moment you reveal your full self, she will see something disappointing and pull away. So you do not reveal your full self. You show her the version of you that feels safest, the easy version, the agreeable version, the quiet version that does not ask for too much, does not want too much, and most importantly, does not risk too much. And at first, she might like that. Your calmness feels refreshing. Your quiet nature feels different from the loud bravado of other men. Your sensitivity feels warm. But as the weeks pass, she begins to sense something missing. Not because you lack masculine energy, but because something inside you is holding back the full weight of who you are. She feels that you do not fully trust yourself. She feels that you do not fully enter the moment. She feels that there is a part of you that is always bracing for disappointment. And when she feels that, she begins to pull back. Not because you are not worthy, but because she can sense that a boy inside you is still waiting for a father who never came. This is the part men do not understand. Masculine presence is not killed by failure. It is not killed by mistakes. It is not killed by awkwardness or quietness or softness. What kills it is the invisible fear that you are fundamentally not enough. Women do not run from imperfection. They run from that fear. And that fear was not born in romance. It was born in childhood. You might remember moments that shaped it. Maybe you remember the way he sighed when you asked a question. Maybe you remember the way he corrected you more than he encouraged you. Maybe you remember waiting for him to come home and feeling the disappointment settle in your stomach when you heard his footsteps and knew which version of him it was going to be. Maybe you remember doing everything right, everything asked of you, and still feeling like he did not truly see you. Or maybe you remember nothing at all, because the wound was not loud. It was quiet. It was made of things that never happened. The words he never said, the approval he never offered, the pride he never showed, the conversations that never took place, the guidance you never received, the hug you waited for but never got. Absence can feel like violence when you are a child. And because of that absence, you grew up unsure of yourself, not completely broken, not weak, just unsure. Unsure of your abilities, unsure of your worth, unsure of what it means to be a man in a world that expects you to know. Masculine presence requires certainty, not in the world, but in yourself. And that certainty was supposed to be passed from father to son, not through lectures, not through rules, through presence, through attention, through the steady warmth of a man who teaches you that your voice matters, that your emotions are not a burden, and that your existence is not too much. Without that, you learn to survive through invisibility. You learn to walk without making noise. You learn to study the moods of others instead of your own. You learn to avoid conflict instead of navigating it. You learn to predict the needs of everyone around you, because being useful felt safer than being yourself. You became a man who is careful, a man who is thoughtful, a man who is often kind to everyone except himself. A man who has depth but hides it. A man who could be powerful but does not trust his own power. A man who feels desire but suppresses it because he does not want to be too much. A man who could take up space but has been conditioned for so long to stay small that expansion feels dangerous. The childhood wound is not that your father failed. The wound is that you built your identity around the belief that his failure was your fault. That belief kills masculine presence, because masculine presence requires a man to stand fully in himself, unapologetically, without looking outward for permission. And you were raised to believe that permission was something you had to earn. But here is the truth you were never told. Masculine presence is not taught by a perfect father. It is born the moment you stop living in the shadow of the one you had. Presence begins when you stop trying to be the man he wanted and begin becoming the man you needed. Presence begins when you stop waiting for approval that will never come. Presence begins when you stop apologizing for existing. Presence begins when you stop asking the world for permission to take up space. Presence begins when you recognize that your quiet nature was never weakness. It was the armor you built around a heart that wanted to feel safe. Presence begins when you stop shrinking. You do not need to become loud. You do not need to become aggressive. You do not need to become a different person. You only need to stop disappearing from your own life. You need to speak even when your voice trembles. You need to take a step forward even when fear tries to pull you back. You need to let your body take up its natural space without apologizing. You need to look at the world without lowering your eyes. Not as an act of dominance, but as an act of self-recognition. You are here. You made it this far. You survived wounds that were never healed. You endured an absence you never deserved. You built a life with no blueprint. That alone means you are stronger than you realize. You are not the boy your father ignored. You are not the boy your father criticized. You are not the boy your father failed to understand. You are not the boy who waited for a man who never arrived. You are a man now, and your presence is something you have the power to reclaim, not by force, not by pretending, but by slowly, quietly choosing to stop abandoning yourself the way you were abandoned. Masculine presence is born in the moment a man finally decides that he is worth standing for. And that decision is yours now. You do not need your father to make it. You do not need anyone to validate it. You only need to open your chest, breathe deeper, and let yourself exist at your full height. The childhood wound will not disappear overnight. It will pull at you in moments of fear. It will whisper in your ear when someone criticizes you. It will tighten your throat when a woman looks at you with admiration. It will try to pull you back into the familiar dark where you lived for so long. But now you know the truth. It was never your lack of strength. It was the belief that you were not allowed to use the strength you already have. And the day you stop believing that lie is the day your masculine presence begins to rise slowly at first. Then with the weight of a man who finally understands that he does not have to disappear to be loved. He only has to show up as himself.